Everything we talk about in this show will get fixed.
Yeah.
I think this actually loops into last week because a lot of people had positive and negative things to say about the idea behind Abundance, the book, the idea that building is kind of the future of solving problems, like building up the supply side of things so that the demand for it can be matched. Housing was the specific example that you dove into really heavily.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come to the other side of that, if we have time, to talk about building too much.
Yes.
Because you had talked about that.
On a lighter note from this extremely sad orphan stuff, let's talk about this power plant in Ecuador collapsing and all the people there dying.
Oh my God.
Let's lighten the mood a bit. Okay, so the main thing I want to chat about today is China and the Belt and Road Initiative, which is their thing around the world that they're basically trying to help all of these countries around the world build up a whole bunch of infrastructure. And it's an interesting counterpoint to what the US has done. I do want to quickly follow up on some of the things that were said last week because I was very heated in the way I discussed things and saw a lot of comments that match that passion in various ways. So just a few follow-ups just to touch on things that I saw in the comments about what I said last week. I talked a lot about housing, about like red versus blue states. I just want to follow up and acknowledge that yes, a city like Houston is blue, and I understand that, but the point is more about the fact that so many people are moving from blue states to red states that in an electoral college, the way our presidential system works, that will actually majorly affect the ability of the Democratic nominee to win. That is the relevancy of red versus blue in the context of building a lot of housing. I might not have expressed that super clearly, but the point isn't that Houston is blue, it's that it's in a red state. That is what is relevant to that particular conversation. On top of that, I think people felt frustrated that I conflated Democrats and various groups on the left, and that's a fair criticism. I will be more cognizant of that going forward. I also realized it'd be really frustrating if you see yourself as, for example, progressive, you're also very fed up with the way that the Democratic Party is governing, as I have been, and then I am sitting here like lumping you all together and being like, you're all doing a bad fucking job. Like that would be very frustrating, and so I can very much empathize with that. I'll be more thoughtful of that going forward. Again, though, for me, this is not meant to be a left versus right thing with building. It's just, I think the country doesn't build enough and we just need to build more stuff. And of course, there's a lot of complexities of homelessness, like empty units held by corporate interests. I don't personally think that would solve affordability. Maybe that helps with homelessness, but there's many nuances to that obviously we didn't get into. I wanted to at least touch on those things.
Yuck.
And again,
I hate nuance.
It-
And I hate you, and I'm going to leave a comment about it.
yeah.
the fact that you would cave like this, I
Yeah.
have so much respect for
He
you.
fucking caved.
Don't
Yeah.
let them shake you.
Yeah.
Triple down, Doug.
I appreciate constructive criticism, and
No,
I think there's
comments were
valid.
great.
Yeah, and I think there's valid things. It's not like I want to like get riled up by every single comment, but I think to be fair, maybe I didn't express some nuance to the extent that I could have in my passionate rant. And I think at the end of the day, like I just want people's lives to be better, and I think building is necessary for like people being able to afford to live. It's necessary for the future being better with like medicine and healthcare and new technologies and a better life. And it's necessary to solve the climate crisis because we have to build a lot of stuff to solve climate. So I just think building, I'm not saying the right is doing some great job. I don't think that. We just need to build. And there's examples in abundance specifically that I kept highlighting over and over that it's to me not about Democrats versus Republicans really. It's just build more. Or you don't build too much, which is what China's done. So let's segue into it. So as you actually mentioned earlier,
We're back to China.
we're back to China.
Okay.
And I think it's an interesting counterpoint. It's always back to China. Because again, I was bitching and moaning about how America doesn't build anything, and China has basically done the exact opposite. So in the 90s and 2000s, China was massively ramping up in production. And then based on largely the financial crisis, is my understanding. This is from an article by Noah Smith, who's an economist. Due to the financial crisis, China's economy was hit really hard. Basically, they were manufacturing all this stuff for people, and then suddenly they weren't buying as much because Europe, America are in this huge recession, right? And so to compensate for that for 2-ish decades, they started building tons and tons and tons of housing and other infrastructure. And so because they were just building this absolutely obscene amount of stuff, one of the stats is they were spending about 44% of their GDP every year on infrastructure compared to like 20% that other countries do. So they're like massively investing at like a double rate of anybody else. And then that bubble sort of burst in 2018. The housing prices cratered, and they've now shifted to this like heavy export model, like you talked about, which is causing a lot of the problems in the world. So that's interesting on its own. But then the Belt and Road Initiative is an interesting part of this. So the Belt and Road Initiative is their global plan that they started in 2013, where they're going to go to a whole bunch of countries around the world. There's 150 of them signed up right now, and they're going to loan them money to do all these big, high infrastructure projects. We're going to go into Kenya, we're going to build a train. We're going to go into Ecuador, we're going to build a power plant. We're going to go into Kazakhstan, we're going to build a whole bunch of trains.
Airports,
Or big,
ports.
I was going to say ports. There's like a big one in Sri Lanka.
Yeah. And so they have this plan, and this sounds good on paper, right? It's like, oh yeah, no, that's awesome. And so this kicked off, and at first it was doing great. And the first 5 years, all these, they were building stuff. All these countries were happy with it. And then there started to be issues. So if you look at the list of projects that China has done under Belt and Road Initiative, it is crazy. It is like so many of the major infrastructure projects in Africa are being funded and planned by Chinese contractors and the Chinese government working with the African government. Same with South America now. Same with the Middle East. Same with Kazakhstan. That whole area, like it's everywhere around the world. China is helping countries to build stuff. It's crazy.
Do you know how there's a big industry in the Congo of like mining cobalt and other
like with your hands or something, and you're dying.
I mean, that is part of it. I think there's an unfortunate reality to the mining.
Sure.
There is that it's not being done ethically.
Yeah.
But if you watch these undercover reporting videos of stuff like that, of these like mineral mines in Africa in general, there's so many Chinese like intermediaries there.
Yes.
And you can watch people go with like, little spy cams on their chest, and they go check out the mine and the human rights abuses, and then they go to where the minerals are being sold at a market, and it's so many Chinese companies operating in these spaces.
Yep. Like a giant percentage of the infrastructure investment is going to Chinese companies in Africa. A lot of the countries, it's like 40% is something the number I saw. It's crazy. China has successfully become incredibly impactful around the world building all these projects, and that contributes to this like trade that you talked about earlier, Brendan, where like now China is the main partner for most of the world in terms of trading, in terms of infrastructure. And to their credit, right, they've been building such an absolutely obscene amount, often to their own detriment. Like they caused this housing crash for themselves a few years ago. But they have just been building an insane amount. So they do have the expertise.
Could you speak a little more to that? Because I know this is a topic you've talked about a lot too. And you mentioned 2018. And I know that the real estate sort of crisis that was ongoing, like they had a huge, I want to say one of their biggest, was it one or two shuttered, like two of their biggest real estate companies?
Two of the biggest in the world. Real estate companies in the world.
Yeah.
What is the consequence of, how did building too much tie into that specifically?
So basically they tried to get out of this problem where they weren't growing in other areas like exports by basically saying, we are as a country are going to invest massively in housing and infrastructure. And we as the government, we're going to put huge quantities of our money into just building tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff. And so there's one of like Guangzhou is the province, I think. They like are so proud of the fact they have like 1,500 bridges and 11 airports, and they're like $400 billion in debt. The province is like the size, it's smaller than Arizona. It's like a small area. I mean, not small, it's China, right? And there's a ton of people there, but like they way overbuilt, they're way in debt. And that was kind of how they funded things. That's how we as America are funding a lot of things. We just keep throwing money at the problem and getting deeper in debt. And they just kept doing this. And the reason everybody was like, yeah, let's keep doing this is because the housing prices kept going up, but it didn't make sense because they're building so many. I can pull up the numbers in this giant stack of paper somewhere, but like they have like hundreds of millions of empty apartments because they just overbuilt. And the problem is just like the financial crisis in the US, all of the citizens invested their money into housing as an asset. They were like, this is going to be our investment. So they were paying insane rates to buy into housing. This bubble kept growing, but the actual value wasn't there. It didn't make sense. They had built way too many housing. They don't need that many apartments.
Okay.
The quality turned out to be really bad in a lot of cases, which what we're about to get to with Belt and Road. Turns out massive, rapid building isn't perfect. It doesn't work all the time.
The quality part is interesting to me because I do think how this ties into what we were talking about earlier is this idea of something like Chinese manufacturing being like cheap and like badly made. And so I think when you present the argument initially about homes not being made well, that is as a counter argument is like this disdain of the idea that Chinese building is cheap. But on this topic specifically, somebody came into the Yard Discord She's originally from China,
Mm-hmm.
and she talked about how this is a really big issue, that the quality of housing in a lot of areas in the country is super low. Like, they've built it and it's available, but it's very bad.
Yeah, and then all these Chinese citizens like put their entire net worth into buying one of these things because they're like, this is one of the few ways as a Chinese citizen I can invest in my future. You don't really have the same options of the stock market necessarily that we do. It's much more controlled by the government. Same with the tech sector or IPOing. And so they were like, we're going to put all of our money into this. But then, like you said, it doesn't make sense and all these problems with the building. So that actually segues into the Belt and Road thing, right? On paper, China over the past decade, 12 years, has with hundreds of countries, I guess 100, has built all of these incredible things of infrastructure, including successfully a train in Kenya or Kazakhstan or Ecuador building this giant power plant. There's many, many, many examples of successfully completed projects. But if you pull up this Wall Street Journal article, Perry, this is basically, they're all falling apart. And so this Wall Street Journal article literally called China's global mega projects are falling apart. And some of, I mean, if you can just kind of like scroll down through this, like some of the quotes are insane. Low quality construction on some of the Belt and Road projects risk crippling key infrastructure and saddling nations with even more costs. In Pakistan, officials shut down the Neelam Jhelum hydroelectric power plant last year after detecting cracks. Uganda's power generation company says it has identified more than 500 construction defects in a Chinese-built 183 megawatt hydropower plant on the Nile. Ugandan officials have blamed a Chinese-built hydropower plant. In Angola, the vast social housing project is, the locals there are saying it's not well built. Even Indonesia's high-speed rail line in Jakarta, which is sometimes successfully said like, oh, this is one of our big key success stories of Belt and Road, has had massive cost overruns and fell years behind schedule. It turns out these things are not working well. And so if you go to, there's another Wall Street Journal that is about, I think it's down here. So this Ecuador power plant that they made with the Chinese offer them a bunch of money to make it. And there's so many problems now with it. There's 17,000 cracks in the power plant's 8 turbines. This in Ecuador, a small, poor country, which
Is that a lot of cracks or like? Is that fine?
To be fair, I don't have a good.
I feel like
frame of
every
reference
turbine
for
has a few
in
cracks,
turbines.
I actually have a quote for that. No crack is acceptable, the utility said in response to questions from the Wall Street Journal.
See, this is good.
That's the
'Cause
first
in my
question you
head,
wanna
I
ask.
was in my head, if you told me 100 cracks is chill,
Yeah.
I would have been like, oh,
That's
sure.
fine.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that many cracks. Turns out, no, you don't want any cracks in your
I
hydroelectric
guess
power
that makes
plant.
a lot of sense.
And this was like, so this is a huge investment for the country. This whole area, it powers like 160,000 homes that weren't powered consistently before. Great thing, except now it's potentially shutting down. And this thing costs so much money to make that Ecuador is now in dire straits. And the Energy Minister Fernando Santos told the media in November, "Over my dead body will I accept this poorly built plant." And so at first they're like, this is awesome. China's coming in. They're going to help us with their expertise and their money. We're going to build all these amazing stuff. We're going to get infrastructure that we wouldn't have done otherwise. And then the quality of so many of these projects is so bad that these countries are getting extremely concerned, because the problem with this whole Belt and Road initiative is that it's not investment really. If you and I, Brendan, want to go and we want to make a power plant together, if you're, I don't know.
You guys have been talking about it a lot.
We have been talking
You've
about
been off the pod.
And
yeah,
we
yeah.
said crack free.
Yeah.
We're going to go crack free on this one.
In a bold new vision. We
I'm
aren't
going to do
put
some
cracks.
crack, but we're going to have a crack free.
Yeah.
What if we had no cracks?
Yeah. We could just fill it with spackle. I don't understand why it's a big deal. Yeah.
Duct tape on the
duct
cracks.
tape on the
right?
things. What's the slap?
Flex
Yeah,
tape.
Flex tape.
Let's flex tape it.
That's why we don't have this problem in
has
America.
the Ecuadorian president talked
Tried.
about putting flex tape
Yeah.
on it?
Unbelievable.
If not,
I think it's just,
dereliction of
yeah,
duty.
they're just not.
Okay, so we're going to build a power plant, you and me.
All right, yeah. So we're gonna build a power plant, you and me. If the way, let's say you're Ecuador, the way we might do this as partners is you say, "Hey, Ecuador, you invest 10 billion. China, will invest 10 billion. We make it together, and then if it does well and it makes money, we're both well off, right? And it pays back our loans, and we benefit in totality, right?
Sure.
That is normally how investment works. That's not what's going on with Belt and Road. What China's doing is loaning the money. So I'm saying, hey, Ecuador, you historically don't have the funds for this. You don't have the tax revenue for this. I'm going to lend you billions of dollars, and then I want you to pay me and my contractors to build your power plant. And then you have to pay it all back at the end. It's just a loan. But if you don't pay it back, then I get control of the power plant.
Yeah.
That is how these are structured. And so from China's perspective, it's like, this is great, dude. You loan money. you make them pay your contractors, so your companies in your country get a bunch of work, and then they have to pay you back. And then if they don't, you get key infrastructure in these major areas. Like, for example, Sri Lanka, which is a small city south of India. They have a giant port in Colombo, which is their capital, and China loaned them money to build a new port in Hambantota, which is the south. It's like this small fishing village, right? And so China helps them build it, and nobody's really using it. And so instead of it being a co-built thing that they're doing together, like Sri Lanka is basically like, we can't pay you back for this stuff. And so in 2017, Sri Lanka had to give China back the port. So China just has for 100 years, they have controlling equity stake and a 100-year lease on this port, which people are now worried China is going to use as like a naval military base because it's just in the Indian Ocean, right? And on the day that China got control, the China official news agency tweeted another milestone along the path of Belt and Road.
Okay.
They completely fucked Sri Lanka. It's wild.
I do think there's merit to what you're saying. I wanted to push back a little bit because I also read about this specific port today. Because this is one of the ones that I've heard about and known about for a long time. Is it didn't go back to like the state, which you clarified. A company has like a controlling percentage of ownership, and then there's like a 99-year lease. They're always doing 99-year leases.
99, baby.
It's always 99. The efficiency of the port since this takeover has gone up. Like the amount of traffic that goes through this port and the amount that it's used has increased greatly since this change was made. I think it speaks to something of like, okay, well, it actually is being managed and used more effectively since then. And then if you were to give like the good faith interpretation of this, it would be that their intention in their export strategy is to create a bunch of bullet points like around this like region so that trade is more viable in this whole region of the world, right?
Yes.
I do think that one of the main criticisms that has come along with this strategy in general is that these loans don't come. I mean, the loans don't come for free beyond
There's
like
strings.
not expecting to get paid back.
Yeah.
You expect to have, would you call it, I don't think you'd call it hard power, right? You'd call it soft power.
Yeah.
Through the influence of like giving all these countries
Yeah.
money. And then I have kind of the pushback to that, if you will,
Okay.
that China is offering these opportunities and loans at lower stakes and lower cost, not just monetarily, than the IMF is before them.
Yeah,
and
that's
this
what I
is
was
one
gonna
of the
say.
big pushbacks is like these countries would normally be going to the IMF, but it's not like the IMF is not abusing the position when they finally give these struggling countries the loans. And the argument is that has been better for a lot of these places to take the Chinese loan for infrastructure than the IMF one.
Yeah.
It's been called debt trap diplomacy. And there's a lot of articles that are written about China's side of it, but I think the IMF and the World Bank have kind of done a similar thing over the years.
International Monetary
It's kind of just
Fund.
like countries that don't have a lot of power get, it's like poor people with high interest credit cards and loan sharks. I think countries that don't have a lot of economic heft are often getting abused by bigger, more powerful countries, regardless. I mean, that is just what it seems to be. So I agree that this is happening. But they are in a spot where they have to take a kind of a bad deal to get this infrastructure they need.
So it's interesting because I think this kind of loops back to another question that I was thinking about.
Yes.
Because if I were to take maybe my interpretation of Doug a week ago, if we were to ignore, which is a pretty big aspect of this, the debt trap aspect of it,
Yes.
and I were to just say, well, isn't this build a lot and build fast strategy better than the alternative? Is this not just a normal consequence of when you try to like create this much change in a short period of time and you're trying to build great things?
Yes.
Is this just not a downside of doing that?
Yeah, so that's why this is so interesting, and it's such an interesting counterpoint to what we were talking about last week, which is build more. And again, you have on one side America just building extremely little and China building, I would say, too rapidly and too recklessly. And this is causing huge problems. It doesn't matter if you build a hydropower plant in Ecuador really fast if it doesn't stay up, right? Then everybody's screwed. And so they're obviously, we have to land in the middle. You should not be on the extremes, and there needs to be a degree of sort of scrutiny around like how this stuff is built. it actually leads into what's happening. So the past few years, if you pull up the second article, Perry, this is from Noah Smith, an article that he wrote about China dropping investing. Basically, at around 2020, a few years before, their investments into new Belt and Road initiatives have plummeted. So China, in response to all of these projects failing, right, of these high-profile cases where it's like, hey, we helped Ecuador build a power plant, we helped Uganda do this, and those things failing, and the government's basically being like, China, you have fucked us. They're now dropping investment dramatically, and they're saying, essentially, they're putting the brakes on the expansion plans and saying,
Wait, sorry,
we're going to
so-
become more focused on the viability of our existing projects.
Is this is this more a response of the demand for this fading, or China choosing to offer it less? You're saying that the countries have been badly afflicted by these choices so many times that there's less people lining up to take the opportunity?
No. So if you go to the next one, so this is a story from Bloomberg where they talk about how there is a train, and actually if you scroll to the top here, so this is in Kenya. This was one of the big success stories, right? They built a train in Kenya from Mombasa, which is on the coast on the east, to Nairobi, which is the capital in the middle. They didn't have that before. So this was one of the first big projects. It was lauded by the president, who is saying this is one of our big infrastructure. This is a huge deal for Kenya. This is massive. And they've estimated the amount of GDP and economic activity and stimulus this has done. So now if you scroll down, recently China said, we're not funding anymore. So they had, if you look at the map, they had made this
You
train
can
track.
walk the last.
Yeah. Well, no, the last bit is half of Kenya.
I
Yeah.
was like looking at the graph and I was like, damn, that's a long
Yeah,
walk.
no, that's a long way. So this black line, they did successfully go from Mombasa to Nairobi, and China had said, we're going to help you fund all the way to Uganda, and they were going to connect Kenya and Uganda. So there's this East African infrastructure and transit route that would really, really help these countries. Great stuff. And they've built 75 miles out of Nairobi, and then China just said, nope, we're done. They were supposed to give them like $4 billion more to do this and just backed out.
So China's the one pulling the plug.
China is the one who is, in response to the projects being received so badly or having so many issues, or at least that's,
Or
seemingly,
not getting paid back. A lot of them they just didn't get paid
and not
back,
being paid back,
which
right?
is like it's a bad investment.
Right. They don't want, like, the Sri Lankan port, that's a strategic port for them to have. They don't need a broken hydroelectric power plant in Ecuador.
Because they're not getting paid back for the president saying they're not going to pay.
right. That's not helpful. So
That's just lost money.
we have to assume what China, the reason, they're just saying, we're going to tighten our belt. We're going to focus on the viability of existing projects. That's kind of what they're saying.
I mean, this all ties in. I mean, this is the same impulse they had to overbuild in the country. They had that
Right.
building era where they were just, everything was funded through building. And when that sort of stopped working, they made this massive pivot to fuck it, we're going all in on exports.
Yes.
And that is why everything has a consequence. Now we're in the area where they're dominating global exports and everyone's pushing back, especially the United States.
Yeah.
And so like everything leads to each other thing. Like
So
this
it's-
was,
So this, what you're saying is that this approach, like these type of projects, don't necessarily map very well to the current strategy.
to their current strategy. No, I don't think
Well,
so.
I think it did for about 12 years. It mapped their thing of, we are just going to build immensely. And then the past couple years, unlike some of the other parts of their economy, they're saying we are going to pull back from just mass infrastructure as a way of getting ourselves out of these problems. So they are pulling back from Belt and Road as a major global initiative. And to me, it's like, okay, as much as I want to sit here and rant about we should build nonstop, build constantly, this is a real cautionary tale of like, it matters if you build shitty stuff. Like, this is
Totally.
absolutely crippling some of these economies. Like Kenya now is trying to go around raising $3.6 billion from all these different private companies, right? Like this is like a disaster for them. And they just have all these plans that are done now. Yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, if you go to like a Kenya, or I don't know if it's Kenya, but a Central African country now, or if you go to Kazakhstan now, or you go to the countries where there used to be trying to build power plants or railroads, what they're doing now is they're selling you BYD cars. They're selling them, they're just exporting them. Like that's their new plan.
It
for
was,
these.
we are going to build infrastructure in China and around the world. That's our way to get out of our problems. And as that has been failing the past few years, it's now, we're just going to build an absolutely obscene amount of stuff in China and sell it to the entire
And you're all
world.
going to buy it.
That's
Everybody
what-
else in the world is going to buy it.
Well, because one of my thoughts with this is when you said they were pulling back on this, I was like, oh, is this soft power strategy maybe fading away? Maybe that was never as big of a part of it as I thought, or it had been reported, because it seems to be very much about money and not getting paid back on these loans and them deciding not to do this anymore. But if you're the exporter of all goods to the rest of the world, you also exert
a different
soft power,
kind of, yeah.
a different kind of soft power
Yeah.
in that way, and people end up falling in line for like different reasons. So it's very, very interesting.
It just is.
I said it
We
again.
got to be somewhere in the middle. That's the crazy thing that I assume
Oh,
everybody agrees
Mr.
with.
Middle
Doug,
of the road.
Unlike
Get
you
him
guys.
out of
Top
the
of
village,
the
Aaron.
fence.
He's Mr.
Doug
Middle
from-
of the road.
Look
Robots.
down. Looks like we need to find a compromise. Yeah, fucking win an election on that one, Doug. No. Anyway,
I think
Wait, I gotta say-
building
wait.
responsibly and affordably is good if it doesn't cause any problems.
and we've done it again.
We've done it again.
Lemonade Stand does it again, folks. Lemonade Stand does it again.